Welcome back. We will start with lecture 3 today. In lecture 2 we have discussed the simultaneous bilingualism. We are looking at childhood bilingualism. So, in case of the simultaneous bilinguals, the children start to learn both languages at the same time. So, they learn two languages simultaneously. So, it is not technically second language, but this is another kind of language acquisition that is often seen in case of children who have more than one language in the environment. Now, we will look at successive bilingualism, or what is technically childhood SLA. Now, childhood SLA is of course opposed to simultaneous bilingualism. Here there is a first language. In case of simultaneous bilinguals, there was no first language and second language, both were first language, but now because it is we are talking about SLA. So, there is a first language and there is a second language, we have both. So, the first language is the native language, as we have already seen. First language is the native language, language of home, the dominant, more frequently used and the stronger language. In case of a bilingual, this is how typically the definition will be, because even though technically it is possible for somebody to be a balanced bilingual where both languages are equally strong, but that does not always happen. So, most of the time the first language is the more dominant one and the second language is less dominant. So, it is also less frequently used and it is weaker too. So, technically the successive bilingualism includes both child and adult. So, that is why we have a differentiation between adult SLA and childhood SLA. So, we are talking about the childhood SLA now, but there are significant difference in terms of the childhood SLA and adult SLA because of various factors. Age is of course one important factor. So, the issues related to successive bilingualism or second language acquisition, as a result we have age as a very important issue, and that has been studied quite at length. Actually, a lot of studies have taken place taking age as an important variable in learning language, whether it is first or second language both. And also within SLA, because childhood and adult SLA both are possible, age becomes a very important pointer or indicator of the differences that you might see in the final outcome. Because if you remember, we talked about the final state of a bilingual. So, it is relevant only in case of SLA. So, the ultimately it is called UA, ultimate attainment. So, ultimate attainment of the second language proficiency also depends on the age. So, there are these theories and there are the debates. So, the cognitive and neural basis of learning language is what deals with the CPH. We talked about CPH before, critical period hypothesis. We will just go over this very briefly just to brush up your memory. So, Lenneberg proposed in all the way back in 1967, proposed that automatic acquisition of language in natural setting can take place only within a particular time frame, and this entire logic was based on various factors. One, that any innate faculty, any kind of innate quality of any animal has a particular time window. So, whether you will look at the animal world, everywhere you will see that. So, because language was an innate was already understood to be an innate faculty, it also has a particular time window. That was one. Secondly, another important idea that Lenneberg brought in was the maturational stage of the brain, and the idea was that brain maturation ends at puberty, and hence all the innate things that a child is supposed to grow, supposed to acquire should be done by that time, including language. So, that was the critical period hypothesis for us. So, this was used for first language acquisition, but later on it was applied to SLA research as well. So, after this period language learning becomes slow and hence often less successful. So, the ideas if you go by one, so if you have if you delay, then there are these issues of constraints of brain development, brain maturation. So, what does it mean? What are we trying to arrive at with respect to brain development? The maturation and the lateralization both. So, what does lateralization mean? lateralization is the specialization, functional specialization of different brain region for various purposes. So, language also has language areas in the brain, and so those lateralizations will be over by the time the child reaches puberty. Hence, it is important that you learn your language before that. So, brain maturation and lateralization. The end point of CPH signals puberty when brain lateralization was thought to be complete. At that time, this is how it was understood. So, experimental studies initially the studies had supported CPH, the outcome typically were supportive of CPH, but later studies were not always in tune with the theory, and they started to question the hypothesis. For example, studies compared children and adult second language learners on learning speed and ultimate attainment, which is the final the ultimate level, the final level of proficiency that you can achieve in your L2, that on basis of this they checked. So, one of the first such studies was carried out all the way back. It is a very important study. They looked at native speakers of English who spent a year in Netherlands learning Dutch. So, these are native speakers of English. They went to Netherlands and they were learning Dutch, and they wanted to check if the CPH holds for this is second language acquisition, and they had different age groups also. They wanted to check if the early group, the early age group were doing better, or the how it really works. So, they had these three different groups. So, there was the older children 12 to 15 years, and younger had three different groups, 3 to 5, 6 to 7 and 8 to 10. This was one of the first studies to counter the claim that older learners do not learn as well as the younger ones. So, this was one of the very first ones. Similarly, one important aspect of Lernerberg's brain claim was brain lateralization. However, later studies found that lateralization completes in children much before puberty. This finding showed that the older children actually learned better. So, that is how they countered it. And also the lateralization studies also looked at the brain maturation stages and found that children actually do not need till puberty for the lateralization to be complete. So, it gets completed much before. So, that also is not going to this is also not tenable. Another important study by Johnson and Newport in 1989 was carried out on Chinese and Korean immigrant population in US, and they were trying to see if age, again the same question, whether age is a variable or if there is anything else that is working there. So, the critical variable was age of arrival in the US, and other factors, duration of stay, motivation, cultural identification and so on. So, they actually had a kind of a holistic understanding about what are the possible factors, what are the possible variables. The task had something like grammaticality judgment. So, something like this: a farmer bought 2 pigs at the market, the bat flew into our attic last night. So, these are ungrammatical sentences. So, they were trying to see if you understand the grammaticality or not. This is a simple example, they had many others. The result, there was a clear distinction in terms of age and performance. So, depending on the age, there was a difference in performance. Now, there comes the twist. Those who arrived before 16, age 16, performance was correlated with the number of years spent in the US. So, those people who the age became an important indicator in this way. So, children who had arrived at US before 16, for them the performance was correlated with the number of years spent. For those who arrived after age 16, performance was varied and was found to be correlated with other factors like motivation, etc. So, many social variables started to be making sense after the age 16. So, probably because that is the time when children socialize more, and so there was a correlation between various kinds of social motivation, social variables and the performance. Now, this study brought new questions to CPH. For example, the cutoff age may not be fixed, and there are factors other than age, because they found that social factors are also important. For example, motivation is an important variable. So, it is not only age, but other factors. And then less is more hypothesis was another important contribution of this study. What is less is more? Less is more, as in the less the well developed the cognitive capacity of the child, the better probably. So, this is not about brain maturation, but it is about the cognitive faculty which is still developing. That is that probably is the idea behind this. So, children when they are young, they are not overwhelmed by a new language, as they do not over analyze. When they are learning, they are still learning, they are still young, then the system is still learning, they are learning new systems in language or otherwise as well. So, when that another new thing comes in, this goes with the flow. So, they do not over analyze, and hence they learn quickly. That is the idea of this. But older learners may suffer more from negative transfer while learning a new language, because the L1 is already in place. This is in case of the L2 with respect to CPH. Now, as the connected idea is that of entrenchment. This is this was proposed by another group of researchers. The idea here is that the more the L1 gets established in the brain, the more entrenched it becomes in the system, the more resistance the system will be towards a new language representation. This is similar to the less is more hypothesis. So, the more L1 is entrenched, the more it will be the brain will be resistant to a new system, because the entire network has been established already, the neural aspect, the conceptual aspect, the lexical, syntactic, everything. So, the system has been built, it is already entrenched in the brain. So, then it is difficult to learn a new system, but if it is not, then it is easy. So, generalizations will also form and so on. So, this was another important contribution with respect to learning a second language a little later in life. Then comes our unified competition model. This model was proposed in 2012. This tries to account for CPH, taking into account various levels of variables. So, we have neural, cognitive and social variables. Then this theory proposes various risk factors. For example, negative transfer, we have already discussed negative transfer before, so we will not go about it again. Entrenchment, as we just saw, parasitism on L1. So, for learning L2 leading to negative transfer. So, when you depend more on L2 to learn your more on L1 to learn your L2, negative transfer happens, and if their systems are different, then it will hinder your learning in your L2 systems, L2 processes. And then there are also mismatched connectivity, which is incorrect connection between processing areas in the brain. This is also important. This also goes back to our entrenchment idea, that the connections are already established. So, if that connectivity gets mismatched in case of L2, then there will be problems. So, these are the risk factors, and of course, social isolation, because we saw that for older children, social factors, social pointers become very important variables and predictors of language attainment, ultimate attainment or the proficiency level. Those are dependent on social factors as well. So, these are the list of, this is the list of factors that this model gives us. So, in effect, basically what they are saying is that if we go from initial studies, that it is only about age, and because it is only maturation. Over time, different researchers have found out that there is a number of different variables that seem to have a dynamic interplay between them. So, age and the neural connectivity, and then the social pointers, all of them seem to interact. Hence, it is a dynamic system, a dynamic interplay between competing languages and their connections to other factors. All of these they work together, and that decides, depending on how that interplay works out, that will decide the how well the L2 will be learnt. Then comes the second factor, which is very important again in terms of SLA, which is interaction. So, input, so age and interaction. Interactionist hypothesis, there is a hypothesis called interaction hypothesis. It is we can trace its root to Stephen Krashen's theory on similar lines. We have discussed Krashen's contribution before. So, the ideas here are that subconscious process of acquisition, if you recall, subconscious process of acquisition refers to the L1, and Krashen makes a distinction between L1 and L2 with respect to subconscious and conscious learning. So, conscious learning for L2, subconscious acquisition for L1. So, with respect to L2 learning, subconscious process occurs when the learner is focused on meaning. So, this can happen in L2 also, provided the focus is of that type, and then receives adequate comprehensible input. We have discussed this before as well. Importance of simple codes, interactions involving naturalistic child and adult learners. So, if these factors are in place in terms of the interactional scenario, then the L2 learning will be similar to L1 learning. So, if your input is comprehensible, meaning which is easy to understand, which is adequate in quantity, and also it is naturalistic, in these cases this will work. So, this actually goes back to all the way to Michael Long's report on input and interactional feature of native speaker and non-native speaker in interview type situations. This study was based on, this hypothesis was based on this interaction between a native speaker and non-native speaker interaction. So, the idea that came out of this interaction and hypothesis and this interview was that comprehensible input is necessary, and this is where Krashen comes in, and modifications to the interactional structure can actually result in better L2 performance. For example, if you have a very strict, to put it very simply, if you have a very strict sort of interaction code between the native speaker and non-native speaker interaction, then the chances of learning the L2 properly will be difficult, will be less. But if you modify that situation, if you bring in more more fluidity, if you bring in more chances of negotiation on the structure, on the meaning and all those things, then that input will be more comprehensible to the L2 learner. So, that is how input and interaction were put together in this hypothesis. So, taking the conversation as a baseline data, Long's report put forward some important pointers. So, there are input and interactional features as we just talked about. So, input features, purely linguistic feature like all the linguistic aspects, vocabulary, sentence complexity, so on and so forth. And interactional features, he actually mentions them separately. For example, clarification request, confirmation check, self repetition and so on. So, these are interactional features. If these are allowed, then the interactional situation will be helpful for the input. That is how the work was. So, modification to the interactional structure can prove to be critical for to make the input comprehensible. Later on, the other researchers also contributed. For example, Terry Pica is one. So, experimental designs were created to test the interaction hypothesis, and they found that the result seems to support. But not only that, this research carried forward the previous findings and emphasized the importance of social relationship between participants as a determinant of interaction. So, typically because we are talking about SLA, second language acquisition, and often it happens in a formal setup. So, there the interactional setup might be unequal. So, the teacher student hierarchy will be there. So, if that kind of an unequal social relationship is there, language learning becomes slightly more difficult. So, they should behave like equivalents. That is what Pica's research pointed out, that if they behave like equivalents as conversation participants, because when you are talking, discussing, and both are part of a conversation, then they are just conversation partners, not teacher and student, or a native speaker, non-native speaker. That kind of hierarchy should not be realized. If that is the case, then that will ensure success. That is what was put forward. More recently, there were many studies that looked at those interactional features, for example, checking for clarification or clarification requests and the kind of strategies children use, and based on these factors they even compared children and adult learners of second language, and they compared them to find out are they using the same kind of strategy or are they using different strategies. So, there have been many studies in this line. For example, some of them found out that children negotiate for meaning using a wide range of strategies. So, clarification request, confirmation checks, comprehension checks and repetition, confirmation and comprehension check both, and repetition. But however, children seem to use fewer comprehension checks than adults in some cases. Some studies also found that. And similarly, there has been updating on Long's hypothesis as well, the interaction hypothesis. He pointed out that children need not only positive evidence, that is what is possible in L2, but they also need negative evidence. We have seen this in case of L1 acquisition as well. So, there is negative evidence in the environment, sometimes there is, sometimes there is not, and so this is the same kind of finding that Long also talks about, that there are positive evidences, but negative evidence also is important. And this over period of time, this is a domain that has, as I have told before also, it has a long history. So, as with every new theory, with every new finding and new data supporting either this theory or that theory, they all have been used in the pedagogical strategies over time. So, depending on what Krashen's theory said, the language teaching methodologies use those strategies. Similarly, all other theories as well. So, they all have implication for language teaching mechanisms, because we are talking about second language acquisition, which happens in formal setup often. Then there are some other studies which looked at a combination of input and interaction. So, differences have been found in the L2 ultimate attainment of younger and older child L2 learners based on longitudinal studies. Differences in UA may be accounted by the language preference of two groups of children. So, this particular study was carried out in 2003. The study was over 3 years in an English as second language setting. Chinese L1 children, 6 young and 4 adolescents. So, these are the two age groups, 5 to 9 and 12 to 6. These are Chinese students learning English, and there were two groups, the younger group and the slightly older group, and they noticed that differences in UA may be accounted for by the language preference of the two children, two groups of children. While the younger children switched their preference to English in the first year, the older learners maintained a preference for Chinese even after 3 years. We can actually explain this through our idea of entrenchment, because by the time they are 12 years, as you can see, the group was 12 to 16, the adolescents, they were 12 years by the time the study started. So, by that time the entrenchment in their L1 was complete. It was the entire network, entire system was or you can say the parameters were set for L1, which was Chinese, and then as a result of which probably they showed preferences to for Chinese only. They did not show their preferences did not shift from Chinese to English, but the younger children, their preference shifted quickly and they shifted to English, and as a result of which their performance was also better. Similarly, we have different kinds of settings depending on second language and foreign language settings. Foreign language setting has L2 as a foreign language, typically in a classroom, no access to that language outside the classroom and so on, but L2 can be you can have access to even outside the classroom. Foreign language setting we will discuss in detail later. Which is similar in some sense to second language, but also different. Also there has been some recent proposals of using or let us say including children as researchers themselves. For example, in a particular study by Pinter claimed it is necessary for children to be part of the research, that they should have a more active role in it, and propose that researchers should consider children as co-researchers. So, basically they want, what they want to do is, typical research happens, the researchers will be looking at children as subject, collecting data from them and giving whatever understanding that we derive from them, it is entirely from our perspective, not from the child's perspective. So, that is where this is a new idea, that what if it will not happen with very small children of course, but we can use it for this method for slightly older children, asking them about their viewpoint, about their learning situation, motivation, change of learning strategies and so on, as it is often done with adult learners. That can be used with children as well. That might give us some kind of some better idea about these things. So, general finding from such work is that children are capable of reflecting on their own development, and hence because they are capable, we might as well incorporate those things in the in research with respect to childhood SLA. So, this is where we complete our lecture 3. In the lecture 4, we will move on to adult SLA, that is when learning a second language in adulthood, not in childhood, in a later stage of life, and what are the differences and what are the important variables. Thank you.